My name is Len McMillan. I'm the chair of the Ontario One Call Board. I've been on the board since this got started. We'll do a little bit on me later on, but for right now, just a couple of cleanup items. If you haven't found the washrooms yet, right out into the foyer to the left, both men's and women's right beside each other. There's exit doors in case anything happens in this facility. One to the right of me, to your left, one straight ahead, and also out the foyer and out through the front doors. There's all kinds of parking lot out there from eating areas if we need them, so we can collect out there if anything goes wrong with alarms in this building, okay? One more thing, cell phones, if you could turn them off or put them on vibrate, that would be greatly appreciated until we get through the formal session here. And I will tell you right now that at the end of the session, there is a plenary session for open questions to happen. So at this point, you can start thinking about where you want to go with that. You will have myself and Ben Hamilton and Scott Moody up here, who's the incoming chair. And we will keep that very open, so you can ask anything that you like at that point in time. All right? So at this point, I'd like to call the 2017 Ontario One Call Annual General Meeting to order. We'll start the official proceedings. This is going to be until around, I think on the agenda, it says 11:30, so that's about 2.5 hours. If you need a break in the meantime on your own, then that's fine. At 11:30, before the plenary starts, we will have a 10-minute break so everybody can get themselves adjusted properly. All right. Next on the agenda is the welcome from the chair. So on behalf of the board of directors, I would like to welcome everyone to our annual general meeting. Typically, we don't introduce the board, but I am going to introduce them so you know who they all are in this room. When I call out your name, I would really appreciate if you could stand up and stay standing until I'm done bringing up all of the directors of the board. On the municipal side, we have Corinne Gabriel from town of Kingsville, Enrico Scaleri from the town of Oakville. We have William Shea from the city of Toronto. On the gas, oil, and pipeline side of our organization, we have John Oakley, and unfortunately, John isn't able to be with us today. We have Mike Shannon from Union Gas. On the electric side, we have Scott Moody from Oakville Hydro. We've had Shelley Cunningham involved in this board from its inception as well. She is not with us today, as this is her last day on the board. And I'm also a representative from the electrical sector, formerly with Hydro One. On the telecom side, we have Mike Foranini from Cable, and Dan Moulton. Don't dare stand, sorry. From the excavator community, we have Karen Marner from ACON and Tony DePede from North Rock Group. And the other category, we have Pierre Fontaine from Laurentian University. So that's the board of directors for this organization. During the day, it would be very helpful for all of us if you tried to meet them all. It's very important that you know who's representing you on this board and doing the work that's important to all of you. Thank you. As a not-for-profit with an open model of governance, member engagement is an important part of our mandate. I'm very pleased to see a large cross-section of our membership here today. I also welcome our excavator and stakeholder representatives, as well as officials from the Ontario Ministry of Government and Consumer Services who are here today with us. We have a greeting letter from the minister, and I'm going to read it off to you. As Minister of Government and Consumer Services, I send my best wishes to all those attending the annual general meeting of Ontario One Call. I am proud of the partnership my ministry has with Ontario One Call and of the important work you do to protect consumers in Ontario. Strengthening consumer protection across Ontario is of utmost priority for my ministry. When businesses get stuck footing the bill for construction delays, consumers pay the price. Ontario One Call is helping to minimize risk and financial burden by diligently serving as the single point of contact for underground utility locate requests. Ontario One Call's efforts to promote safe digging practices and increased public safety are invaluable. By working to increase the efficiency, timeliness, and coordination of digging activities across the province, you are ensuring Ontario businesses and consumers are protected. I am grateful for your dedication to your work and to the people of Ontario, and encourage infrastructure owners and excavators to continue to work together to support timely construction activity in their communities. Please accept my greetings as you celebrate another year of hard work and look ahead to your future achievements. Sincerely, Tracy McCharles. Mr. Minister. There's a lot of important dialogue in that. That's going to continue on, and what you see in the themes here today about working together. Very important that we stick to that theme as far as the province of Ontario goes and the people that would work and live here. Okay, in the spirit of openness, there will be an open plenary session after the formal AGM proceedings where anyone can ask questions of myself, the incoming Chair Scott Moody, and the Executive Director Ben Hamilton. Moving right along, my favorite part of these meetings is the review of the previous minutes. And I know you're all looking forward to it. This will be very quick. The minutes are in your package. Approval of last year's minutes. The minutes of last year's AGM were circulated in advance of this meeting. And I'm going to ask a very simple question. So, shall those minutes be approved? Those in favor? It's not a very big number. We're going to have to go through them all. Those opposed? That's a better number. Carried. There were no specific items in the minutes that were to be reported on at this AGM, so we'll proceed to the report from the chair. Okay? And that's me, so I get to stay here. When I first joined Ontario One Call Board, there was a huge level of excitement in the air. It had been around 10 years of long and strenuous lifting by the Ontario Regional Common Ground Alliance to facilitate a bill coming into play. And I had been on the board of the ORCGA for a great length of time and spent some time as the chair of that group. And we had been witness to Bill 8 coming into law. The act itself was called the Ontario Underground Infrastructure Notification System Act. That happened in 2012. By 2014, we had regulations in place and we were ready to go. The excitement in the air turned very quickly to anxiety as the newly formed board started to go through what had to happen in order to make this an organization that was successful and could move forward with the mandate that we were given by the government. At that juncture in time, I don't think anyone was of the opinion that we would be what we are today. We've come a long way. There's been a lot of huge successes that have taken place, a lot of hard work. We have a very successful operating call center. We have a new office that supports the call center in Guelph in Sudbury. We have policies and procedures in place for all of our activities that are going on. We're financially stable. There's a lot of excellent work that has gone on to put us where we are, and it has been a huge success story. We've become the benchmark for other jurisdictions to follow in the way of a one-call system. Our new structure demonstrates our commitment to delivering high-quality services to members and excavators, and also to continually look for ways to improve our value to members. You will hear today about a number of initiatives that will improve the quality of our services and benefit damage prevention efforts in Ontario. To support this important work, the Board of Directors established a 5-year strategic plan in 2016, very early in that year. which you'll find summarized in your annual report. The 5-year vision that we created includes members viewing us as an extension of their own internal damage prevention processes and providing strategic value beyond that. Services which are innovative and help unlock value for members. Excavators seeing us as reliable, firm, and fair. Government seeing us as an open, transparent, and listening to our stakeholders. The public having a universal commitment to call before you dig, which is a critical one. For the public, what we think is an everyday activity becomes a risk that is unknown to them, a hazard that they can't manage without help. The board updated this plan early in 2017 and put additional focus on supporting our members as they evolve their locate delivery processes, developing an external-facing scorecard to enhance the organization's accountability, moving forward with compliance, including the training and education of members, excavators, and stakeholders. Very, very critical, the 3 updates that were added to that plan. Most critical, I think, is supporting our members as they evolve their internal processes. This has to be an inclusive organization. It's member-driven, that supports each other, that creates visibility, opportunity, and improvements in the entire process. Damage prevention is, of course, not the responsibility of one organization alone. Each of our members is committed to creating an Ontario free of damages to buried infrastructure. Excavators are committed to their workers using the locate process so that everyone can get home safely at the end of each day. That's why we'll continue to work to spread the message of call before you dig. Ontario One Call has an important relationship with the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. We will continue to build this relationship to support our obligations to the ministry contained, and we look forward to the signing of a revised Memorandum of Understanding with the ministry in the very near future. At this meeting, we'll be welcoming new members to our Board of Directors. They will join a talented group of continuing board members who have helped guide the direction of Ontario One Call over the last several years. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Shelley Cunningham and Tony Fiescha, who is not here, for their contributions to the board as they step down at this AGM. And at the end of this AGM and at the end of the board meeting that follows it, I will also be stepping down. We're leaving this place better than what we think we started with. Every year there is a change in board and a change in chair. The progress that we make is slow and positive. We're following a guideline for our work activities. We're also ensuring that what's left behind has a really stable foundation in order to continue to operate. I'm turning over the role of chair to Scott Moody. There is much more work to do, but every year we get closer to the end state that we're looking for, which is a safer Ontario. That goal is one that we share, the province where there are no damages to buried infrastructure, where workers and the public can go home safely. I am thankful of the work that each of you do to make that day come closer, and I have been very, very excited and pleased of my involvement with the One Call business over the last number of years, and it has been my pleasure to serve as the chair and to serve on this board. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Ben Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of Ontario One Call. I'll just move forward in the slide deck here. Before I get into the meat of my presentation, I just want to thank a few individuals From the One Call team, I want to thank Kim Smith and Corey Officer, who are the two people primarily responsible for putting together today's great event. And I do believe that the centerpieces are available for you to take home. I'll look for Kim to acknowledge that with a nod. Otherwise, you'd just be stealing the property of the Burlington Convention Center. But she has given the nod. You can fight amongst yourself for who gets to take the centerpiece home. I don't know if they're meant to be planted in the garden, but I wouldn't discourage you from that. Also want to point out some of the staff we have here at Ontario One Call. I won't introduce them all by name. I'll just ask them to stand up briefly. One Call, you know, when I first started, I'll ask them to stand up now. Let's see if they're listening. Yes, they are. So when I started working with Ontario One Call about 10 years ago, as Len mentioned, when I was working with ORCGA on legislation, One Call was a very small organization. It was only a handful of people. Now it's an organization of approaching 150 people, now that we've moved our contact center in-house. And it's a team where a lot of individuals, not just the leadership, have taken it upon themselves to make sure there's a strong identity and a strong culture and a real commitment to serving excavators and members. And these people certainly deserve a round of applause for the progress they've made and helped our members and excavators make in the last few years. Moving on, let me also thank the staff here at the Burlington Convention Center. They've been great partners to work with, and certainly it's a lovely event today. The weather's nice so far. I don't know if that's going to hold up all day, but certainly they've been a great host for us to work with. Just want to go through a few slides just to update you on some of the activities of Ontario One Call. Talk mostly about 2016 and what was accomplished, but also look forward to 2017. Ontario One Call, by the numbers, I'm often asked about the numbers, some of the high-level things that we're accomplishing. These are the numbers I give out most frequently. How many requests do we receive? It's about 1 million a year. And when you think about 1 million requests leading to 7 million notifications, it reflects the extraordinary amount of work being done in Ontario in the public right-of-way. The work of excavators to improve our roads, to improve our energy infrastructure, to improve our telecom services is enormous. The work that municipalities and the public sector and private sector companies do is extraordinary. And in response, the work done by members to respond to those requests to make sure that 1 million excavations can happen in a more safe way is a pretty extraordinary effort. Minus 40%, that's roughly what we've reduced per notification fees by over the last 3 years. And in a time where any organization, public or private, is struggling for money and looking for every dollar, we're trying our best to make sure that we minimize the amount of money we need to take from our membership. If you look at the annual report in the financial statements, the actual amount of money in terms of raw dollars, not percentages, that our members paid into the system declined from 9.3 million in 2015 to 8.4 million in 2016. So just looking at that 1 year, it's not just a percentage decrease in unit costs, it's also a decrease in the absolute amount of money taken from members. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, that we're very mindful about safeguarding the money of our membership. Over 1,000 individuals have participated in our education and training seminars. Those will only become more important with time as we move forward with things like map selection notification and other improvements to the system. And Katie Gottsman from One Call will talk about those in a few minutes. But generally, our education and training is a very important component and will be increasingly important as we move forward in evolving and improving the system. And the number 129, that's a number of agents who we have on our roster, not FTEs I always say, but our roster, who work at Ontario One Call dealing with your telephone requests, dealing with your web tickets, and making sure that your requests for excavation are dispatched successfully and accurately, most importantly, to our membership. And the work that those people do is extraordinary when you think of the peakiness of our peak season, if that's a word. The peak season volumes are 4 times the volumes of the non-peak season. And the ability of the contact center to increase and decrease in size as demand requires, and also to handle what are often very busy mornings, especially those Monday and Tuesday mornings, is a real testament to their discipline and commitment to the job and the wonderful support they get from Ontario One Call's team lead and contact center manager and the whole operations and IT team. So they do a lot of the very important work that you rely on every day. I'm not going to read through all the 2016 priorities. They're included in the annual report, and they certainly do deserve a close read because they reflect a lot of important work we're doing to improve the system. The work we do to improve the system has a couple different facets. We're working to improve the online web ticket experience. We're working to make the system more intuitive for people entering information and more accurate in terms of the information it produces for our members and their locate service providers. We're also looking to deal with some of the abuses and excesses, both on the part of excavators and on the part of members. When the board did their strategic planning, they've always called out that there are some bad habits and bad practices that have existed in the industry, both on the excavator and member side, and some of those bad behaviors are reinforced by the bad behavior of others. And we've done a lot to unwind the excesses of both excavator behavior with things like ticket dumping and emergency locate abuse, and also working with members to address some of their shortcomings, mostly around issues of providing late locates, but also issues that have come forward such as abusing the renegotiation of tickets. So we're working both on the member side and the excavator side to address some of those behaviors that have really thrown the wrench into the system. We've also been doing a lot of work with our committees. The operations committee was restruck last year and has done a lot to focus on several key priorities. Those are some of the key ones that Katie will talk about. Our compliance committee has also selected a new membership and is really focused on moving forward with hearings and matters now that the board has identified their policies in terms of what certain types of offenses and how they should be dealt with. And I would certainly encourage everyone, member and excavator, to check your email in the next few weeks because we will schedule a webinar in which we'll go through some of the compliance policies and how the compliance committee will work to bring certain matters to hearings. And that should take place in the next few weeks, so please do keep your eyes open for that. And in terms of some of the other work we're doing, we're also looking to increase the amount of information we have on our website. And that's part of a broader initiative to increase the amount of disclosure we have, share more information with membership, and as Len mentioned, really improve the ability of our membership to understand their own performance. So I've talked a little bit about our team and the great work that they do. One challenge we faced last year was moving to an in-house contact center without a lot of background information or legacy information about what those demands would be. And certainly during the peak seasons last year, we did experience very high volumes, and certainly that affected the wait times on the phone. I'm very glad to report that through the analysis done by our staff and the great work we've done hiring additional resources through our contact center leadership and our HR leadership, our service levels are now consistently around 90%. I believe month to date they're at 91 or 92%, and year to date they're at 90%, which is well above the target level of 80%, meaning 80% of calls answered within 20 seconds. So very quickly there's been a significant improvement and remediation of one of those pain points from last year. The opening of the Northern Ontario office has also taken place. That's in Sudbury, Ontario. It's important for 2 reasons. First, it fulfills our legal mandate to operate a contact center in Northern Ontario. That's part of Bill 8 itself. And it also allows us to provide greater support for the Guelph Contact Center during peak periods. It operates mostly from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and that additional resource in Sudbury has been the biggest part of making sure that we can provide excellent service levels to people calling into the contact center. And also new staff. We've listened carefully to excavators and members about what kind of support they need on a day-to-day basis as they go through their own evolutions. So first, we've talked about the contact center staff in Sudbury to make sure we're providing effective answering of phone requests and also turning around of web ticket requests which suspend. Web tickets actually comprise about 70% of the volume, so that's actually a very important cohort of work as well. So we're making sure we have the staff present to deliver on that service level. We also have a new QA team, and that helps agents with their own performance, providing feedback in near real time to make sure that their work, both on suspended tickets and phone calls, is as accurate and as clean, as effective as possible, and that improves the experience for everyone. And we've also established a resource for the excavator help desk. And that position helps excavators with their day-to-day questions, but also helps us with analysis in terms of evaluating how excavators are using the web ticket and some of the challenges they may face and some of the ways in which our system and our processes might negatively impact them. So the staff resources we do have are very much focused on the operation of the system and improving its operation in a very frontline, tactile way. The plan for 2017, and this is also featured in the annual report as well, it focuses on the three main themes that we established in 2015 with strategic planning: member focus and value, governance and accountability, and openness and transparency. The first of these priorities reflects our mandate as a member-driven company, and the second to address our role not only as an organization which serves the membership and excavators, but also the public and the public interest more broadly. So with the member focus and value, we've talked about MSN and what it'll mean for excavators and members. We're doing a lot to improve our analytics and reporting, especially the analytics that members themselves can use to understand their own performance. And of course, we've talked about the Northern Ontario office, reducing emergency locate abuse, and the careful management of costs. When we turn towards questions of governance and accountability and openness and transparency, as Len mentioned, our relationship with the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services is an important part of our mandate, an important part of what we do and how we're accountable. And in the next few weeks, we should sign a new memorandum of understanding which outlines the mutual accountabilities that Ontario One Call has to the provincial government, and that's an important accountability mechanism. Also, completing the new compliance policies, which the board did earlier this year, and again, we'll go through those in more detail at the upcoming webinar. And as it comes to openness and transparency, of all these different aspects, probably the most important is the public education mandate. Ontario One Call historically hasn't spent a lot of money on advertising, but in 2012, when the bill passed, it had a specific mandate to promote public education and awareness. And so one of the four mandates provided by that legislation requires the board and the organization to make sure that we're doing the things necessary to make sure that more people know about Ontario One Call and more people know what call before you dig means. And as Len said, that they develop a shared understanding and commitment to safe excavation. So this year, some of you will have seen our first Ontario One Call commercials featuring Gord in the jean shirt, digging with his auger in a slightly irresponsible way, and his polite neighbor, Jan, coming across the fence to remind him to contact Ontario One Call. So anecdotally, we've heard a lot of good feedback from that. Our strategy in terms of increasing our visibility through television commercials, through our online presence, through social media. A lot of you who use YouTube will probably have seen the same commercial as well. It's one of those commercials that interrupts you at the start of your videos. And those, I believe, have received over 700,000 views each for the 30-second and 15-second version. So we're certainly achieving a lot of eyeballs onto the one call message. We're starting from a relatively low base. We did a survey last year that found unprompted name recognition for Ontario One Call was 7%, and aided name call recognition was about 30%. So even though one call and call before you dig is something that everyone in this room breathes day in, day out, it's still not well known among the public of Ontario. There's 13, 14 million of them, so it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of consistent investment to make sure that we're able to move the needle and achieve that shared commitment and understanding of call before you dig. The annual report in the strategic section also talks about an organizational scorecard, something different than a staff scorecard that many of you are used to, and we have our own that's mentioned in the report as well. This is about measuring the things that Ontario One Call as a whole is responsible for. So Ontario One Call and its staff isn't responsible for delivering locates, but the legislation says 5 business day locates. So it's important that we measure that and see how well we're doing at the macro level. The legislation doesn't talk about safety at all, actually. It doesn't talk about a requirement that we reduce damages. But obviously, that's the reason for this organization existing. So the scorecard will include those types of metric that, while not necessarily in the direct control of Ontario One Call, are an important part of what we want to achieve as an organization. And also, finally, and I'll say it for a third time, education for members on the new compliance policies. It's been a challenge with compliance to get the right committee and the right setup in terms of policies. It's been a work in progress, and there's been a lot of hard work done by members and excavators who've served on those 2 committees, the first and second compliance committee. And I just want to recognize the work that they've done and the board of directors as a whole to get us to this point. And we very much look forward in 2017 to moving forward with the first number of compliance cases. It's important to demonstrate that this industry can take control of its own non-compliance issues as opposed to other organizations or other sectors where it's left to an external body to provide regulation and penalties as they see fit. I think there's a shared interest across the industry amongst members and excavators to make sure that we take accountability for performance and that the people who are best able to solve the problem are the people like in this room. So that's an important area for us to move forward on. And with our strategic plan, we've talked about the organization scorecard, one that's really about our higher level mandate and one that's also public facing. And it's about accountability to make sure that the staff, the board, and all members and excavators are focused on the real outcomes we want as an organization, not focusing on the inputs in terms of how much you're spending on the one call organization or how many agents you have, but really focusing on the things we want to get out of this effort. And the DNA for that goes all the way back to 2003 and 2004 when the ORCGA was first created. So this is really a follow-through of more than 10 years of commitment to moving the needle on these issues. We're also focusing on how we can support our membership through this period of transformation. Some of it is dealing with abuses and excesses, both on excavators' ends, but also the members' end as well. A lot of self-defeating behaviors, such as dumping tickets into the system, have been severely curtailed. And we're also supporting them with increased analytics and insight into their own locate delivery performance. And as I mentioned before, not just finalizing the compliance policies and procedures, but engaging with members and excavators to increase their understanding of their role and their responsibilities. Like I said, we want the industry to take accountability and responsibility for its own performance, not leave that for some other third party who's not accountable or involved with our day-to-day issues necessarily. So that describes both 2016 and 2017. I would encourage you to give the annual report a close read. it does give you a very strong sense of where we're going as an organization, not just in terms of the next 12 months for 2017, but also just our general outlook on how we want the organization to evolve. At the end of the AGM formal business, we'll have a brief break, and then we'll go into a plenary session. So relatively unique amongst organizations in this role, the floor will be open for you to ask questions, and you can ask, hopefully, questions of broad interest to excavators and members, but certainly we are very open to hearing your specific concerns and acting upon them. We don't try to hide in terms of hiding behind our mandates or hiding behind an office. We're very much interested in your direct feedback, and we're happy to answer those questions as staff, as a board, and we certainly welcome those questions as they come forward later today. With that, I'll pass the clicker over to Karen Marner. Karen's been our treasurer for the last several years and has done a great job in terms of improving what we've done in terms of our financial discipline and our financial procedures. Coming from a very small organization to one with a much larger number of employees, a larger budget, and a much broader mandate with also public legislation in place, those things became very important. And certainly I, as the executive director, rely a lot on Karen to provide her good advice and to make sure that we continue to improve on this front. So I'm very grateful for her support, and she'll go through some of the financial highlights for you today.
Thanks, Ben. I find it ironic that on my slide it says that the notification fees have been reduced by 37%, and did you notice on Ben's slide it says around 40%? So it's funny how that works. Yeah, you're allowed to round, I'm not allowed to round. So the first highlight I'd like to point out was also on Ben's slide as well. The notification fees in 2016 reduced from $1.40 to $1.10, which is about a 20% decrease. Overall, in the last 3 years, we're saying that the notification fees have reduced by 37%. But you will see that our revenues from members decreased from 9.3 million to 8.4 million. So that decrease is actually only 10%. So you can see the amount of volume increase that we have done over the 2015 to 2016 period, and we continue to monitor that balance of how much we can reduce the individual fee compared to what we project the volume of the increased number of notifications to be. So as we're going along in the last 3 years, we are getting better trends and are able to be a little more fine-tuned with our cash and our cash reserves. So this year was the first year that we identified that we are holding cash for specific purposes. So the board has allocated $2 million of the cash for future system upgrades. And Katie Gosselin will come up after me and discuss in more detail the nature of those future system upgrades. And I would also like to point out that our cash as of December 31st was $6.2 million. But as of May, our cash has decreased almost $3 million. So right now we're sitting at $3.3 million, so actually $2.9 million decrease, not three. But I just wanted to make members aware that the December 31st cash balance is not a peak or a trough, but somewhere in between, and that the trough typically occurs in May or June. So that is what we're managing the cash balances to. So those were the key highlights from on the cash and revenue side. As well, I just wanted to point out that on page 24 of the annual report, you will see a significant increase in our computer software, our computer equipment, and furniture owned by Ontario One Call. These were specific to the fact of putting an in-house call center in place. So for those 129 peak call center contact employees, it meant a significant investment in computer software and hardware. So we have spent a fair bit of time with both our auditors and our internal accountants to make sure that we are categorizing and amortizing each asset class. So that was something that we ramped up in 2015 and continue to monitor through 2016. The other thing that we continue to monitor, as I said before, is that we are trying to ensure we have significant flexibility to fund the system upgrades and to account for any unforeseen variances in the operating revenue. We'll continue to monitor this as we progress through our major system changes, all of which, the most significant of which are planned for 2017 and 2018. Our current 2017 outlook is to be on track with the budget. Ben and his team have done an excellent job now that they've had that year's experience with the in-house call center to do an excellent job forecasting. And we continue to monitor our financial situation closely, and we look for continued opportunities to reduce members' costs. So just want to put it out there. We understand that that is one of your more significant concerns as well. At the same time, we are committed to ensuring that the organization has the funds it needs to successfully deliver on its mandates. So with that, that concludes my report on the 2016 financials. What I would like at the moment is to request a motion to approve Donna A. Goldstein, Chartered Accountant, as the Ontario One Call Independent Auditors for 2017 and 2018. So can I have a motion? Okay, I see Dan was the first one with his hands up, and seconded. Okay, Tony. Any, all in favor? Or those in favor? Anyone opposed? Excellent. Thank you. Motion carried. And with that, I turn it over to Len. Is that right?
I need this one?
Oh, I can. You want me to move it along?
I didn't get orders.
Is that yours, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, next order of business is to elect the directors for the organization. The process to select members of the board of directors is described in Ontario One Call Bylaw Number 2, Article 12. As required, the Governance and Nominations Committee has received nominations for the open board positions, and we've prepared the following slate of directors. I'm going to put the question to the entire membership. On the overhead, you can see the existing board members that are remaining with the board, and you can see the two new appointees. The question for the entire membership is, shall the board of directors as adopted be proposed? Those in favor? Those opposed? Again, carried. Okay. That will complete that order of business. And the next one up on the podium here is Katie Gottsman. She's going to present the future system and service improvements. Katie?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So Ontario One Call is a busy place, right? But for my part today, I just want to focus on a change that's coming up in December 2017. This change is actually going to affect the way in which we notify our members. So before I start that, I'd like to show you a little bit about how notification works today. So diving right in, first we have what we call internally a 7-to-1 notification. With this, we have a single civic address, we receive a dig street, 2 cross streets, and the corner lot question is typically answered no or unknown. So having a peek at what our internal maps look like, here you'll notice that you have a gold line, and this is where the civic validates on the dig street with the cross streets provided. Any member's infrastructure that intersects that gold street will be notified. Next, we have what we call a 7-to-4 notification. The majority of the information is the same, but the corner lot question is answered with one of the two intersecting streets. So we're going to pretend that Oak Street is the corner lot with 806 Gordon Street here. Here we're able to isolate which streets to notify. We're going to notify Gordon and Oak, and any members' infrastructure that intersects those two streets will be notified. Next, we have full segment notification. Here we received the Dig Street, two cross streets, and the corner lot question most commonly answered is unknown. In this map, you'll notice that these segments are highlighted in purple, and it means that a member's infrastructure that crosses this will be notified on any of these purple street segments. So having seen that, what is notification going to look like in the future? Here, what you see is a satellite image within our web portal. The green represents a map selection created by the excavator. And once they've completed their ticket and is sent into our system, what we're going to do is add a safety buffer. That's represented there in red. Together, they're going to be known as the combined excavation area. Any member's infrastructure that crosses this combined excavation area will be notified. Now, this is also 806 Gordon Street. So you can quickly start to see how notification may decrease for members. We're no longer looking at street segments. In this slide here, I'm just showing you that we can also have multiple map selections within one attachment for one civic address. So each of these will also be their own combined excavation areas, and they're going to generate notification. So how about that member coverage? Right now we have what we call defined coverage and undefined coverage. With defined coverage, you can see that we have a bit more specific information about where infrastructure is located. With undefined coverage, it's a greater area where notification will most commonly be generated no matter where an excavation is occurring. With conjunction with the map selection notification, you can start to quickly see the benefits of having a defined coverage. Now, this is entirely up to the member. Ontario One Call, PlanView are working with members right now and will continue to work with you throughout this process to help you try to get to this more specific area. We encourage everybody to reach out to see if you can do that with your mapping. We've taken a lot of steps in this process, but I just wanted to highlight some key ones. To start with, we've improved some of the satellite imagery that we have and the tool itself. We have a civic pin drop, a measuring tool, and a multiple map selection overlay coming out in July. This is all to help excavators identify their location within the web portal and help them navigate through the ticket itself. Now, none of this means anything without some training, so we've increased our training through June, and we will also be adding more training sessions as we go through the year. We want to ensure that everybody understands the process change and how it's going to affect them, both excavators and members. Of course, we've had plenty of communication. Member Services is our team that has reached out to members directly to help them understand the change for them, how to implement mapping changes. We have email campaigns that reach the excavators and membership and other stakeholders. We're also, with that, trying to make sure that everyone is aware of the changes. Our education and training department have done webinars, one-on-ones with members and excavators alike to, again, help us with this process. And PlanView, who's our mapping provider, is doing a campaign as well and has started earlier in the year to help us make sure that members understand what the change is within the mapping system and how to best implement it. So why are we changing? The main goal, of course, is to get the most accurate information that we can. As we move forward as an organization, that's always going to be a continuous goal for us. How can we improve the ticket? How can we improve the quality of the information that we receive? Accurate information is going to help us identify which members need to be notified on a ticket and hopefully decrease that amount of members for excavators that have to wait for their locates to be received. And in turn, long term, we hope to see a reduction in the waiting time for locates. Now, I know this is a fairly high overview of what I think is a pretty complex change, so I encourage everybody to contact us if you'd like more information or clarity. For excavators, we have solutions at owen1call.com. And for members, as always, member services at owen1call.com. Thank you very much for your time.
So we are quite a bit ahead of schedule. We'll just keep it going here. The part that we're going to go through now is any other business. As mentioned earlier, we have an open plenary session immediately following the AGM proceedings to allow people to ask questions around the ongoing operations and governance of Ontario One Call. If there's any other business that relates to the proceedings of this AGM, please bring them up now. Business for the AGM part. Okay, so the formal adjournment process is carefully documented. I just want to reflect a little bit as to what's gone on so far. I think in the desire of the AGM, the achievement to be accomplished today is for you to get a comfort level of how the organization is being run. The board is very cognizant of the fact that the dollars that are spent in this organization come from the members. So we're very careful about measuring the need for change with the desire to keep the costs down and manage the balance of that. It's an ongoing dialogue. There's consistently issues in the IT world for updates. We've allotted some dollars to keep that properly funded. This is an organization that has a pretty tight time frame for dollars in and dollars out. So we've created a bit of a buffer to allow ourselves some opportunities to make improvements. You've heard about that from Karen. Ben has a very strong desire to move forward with the strategic direction and strategic plan that was created by the board. It's a very, very broad strategic plan. It covers a lot of areas. A high cost item for this organization is our desire to educate the public. The marketing plan that we have with OKD is very strong. We've doubled the involvement in that over the last year. You're going to see more and more advertising and activity going on in Home Depot, in rental centers, in order to ensure that we are meeting the mandate given to us by the government, but also to encourage the people of Ontario to call before you dig. So it's very, very strong. We put a lot of our dollars into that. So your money, we believe, is being spent wisely. We've added staff in order to make sure that we're meeting the metrics that have been decided by the board represents top quartile performance for a call contact center. That's our mandate. That's what we want to do. We think we need that for your organizations to run efficiently. There are issues that we have. One is continuing to open the avenue for you to have involvement with One Call. So I'm very, very pleased to see the number of people that we have in the room here today. This is a significant increase from what we had for the first AGM, which we could have sat at one of these tables. But we're here, and we're continuing to increase the access to the organization. People, everyone that's involved in this sector should be free to come forward with their issues and know how to get their information or their concerns heard by not only the staff, but by the board. So that's our desire. If you can encourage your friends to come next year, the number should double again, which would be extremely exciting for the board. This is the only opportunity we have as an organization to advertise the successes that we've had over the previous year. So I would really encourage you to continue to participate. The other group that I want to thank is the Ontario One Call staff, who do a fabulous job of meeting not only the board's needs, but the members' needs. And we owe them a round of applause for today's activities. This is no easy feat to get organized for an AGM when you've got 15 board members that are all in different sectors. They're very busy, everyone trying to approve what our annual report looks like, getting our financials in play. This is not an easy thing to accomplish, and I really do thank them for their efforts. So, thank you. Just a couple other things I wanted to note. The slate of directors that will be going forward to the preceding board meeting. The two new members that are on that slate, Chris Hudson from Electra, which is the newly formed utility around the greater expanded GTA, and Kevin Green from Bell will offer huge support to the board. We continually get opportunities to add very, very capable people to the board, which makes this organization click along at a pretty good pace. So thank you for joining the slate, and we'll get the approvals in place after this meeting is over. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the strategic plan. There's a lot of effort that goes into that. It is the future of this organization. It's the vision that we've created on your behalf. It's in the report that you've got in your hands. Have a look at it. Alignment between the board, the members, and that strategic plan is absolutely essential to success. So please have a good read of the information that you've got. And with that, I'd like to declare the 2016 Ontario One Call AGM adjourned. Could I get someone to push that motion? Thank you. And the seconder, way back there. Everybody in agreement? Anyone opposed? They'd like to talk to me longer? We're good. Thank you. Just before you clap, I do appreciate the applause, by the way. This will be we can take 15 minutes adjournment for the meeting, and we'll move from that into the plenary session. That will be Scott Moody, the incoming chair, myself, and Ben, and anybody else that we need to support for answers that we can't openly offer to you. We can get them up here to the mic as well. So think about where you want to go with that, and ask your questions openly. We'll give you all the information we can. Thank you very much.
Ontario One Call is pretty unique in having an open plenary session where any attendee, doesn't matter if you're an excavator or a member, you don't need to be some big shot anywhere, just gets to ask us whatever question is on their mind. The only proviso is I would ask that it be of general interest to the participants today and not a tremendously specific question about your own personal issue or your own personal mapping problem. If you do have a specific issue, we're very happy to talk about that today, and the staff who are here on site are very happy to meet you and to talk about whatever your very specific issue might be. We do expect a nice, lively session. As we've talked about, we've done a lot of things on both the excavator side and the member side in terms of curbing abuses. So, we've seen excavator excesses around abuse of emergency locates, ticket dumping. We've seen those addressed in the last 18 months. Also changes we've made more recently to policies around emergencies and how certain types of work are processed as priority zeros and not emergencies. That's got a lot of attention as well. On the member side, we've also seen a lot of changes around how tickets are renegotiated and what's allowed and not allowed. Some of the recent changes we've made have been very effective in reducing some of the instances of excavators pointing out inappropriate renegotiations. And of course, we continue to work with members to help them understand their own performance in terms of providing locates in a timely way. And for the most important part, something that affects members and excavators equally is the overall system and the improvements we make to the system. For excavators, we're trying to make our system and our online interaction more intuitive, more practical, and for the member, more accurate. And by creating that type of strong platform, it's really the area where we can make the most progress in making the system work better for everyone. So those are some of the themes going into this plenary session, but now the floor is yours. So put your hand up. Corey's right there. And we'll take some questions.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Karn. I'm from Sudbury. My question is about ticket dumping. I was talking to Crystal just before the break. I want to know what the limit where you guys decide it has become ticket dumping, just because I'm coming from I'm relaying the message on behalf of our dispatch. Like I'm on the receiving end of locates, she's on the inputting side of locates, and we have about 1,200 locate requests just for either tree planting or tree stumping that we need to get locates for. So, and like we just have a small window of when we can get them in the ground. So I want to know what the limit of ticket dumping is, and when do you guys decide that we're abusing the ticket dumping, I guess?
Oh, you're at the right table. Steve Wall and Rob Matthews from our
Yeah, they
compliance
told me
group
they
are
were going
there.
to tie my hands.
So one big issue that members face is ticket dumping. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what ticket dumping means, it's an instance where an entity might dump an enormous amount of requests into the system all at once without necessarily being able to complete that work within 30 days. And that's what's required under the legislation. So there is no hard and fast number. I would say that 1,200 is certainly a very high number that would definitely get attention.
Sorry, they're not coming in all at once, but they are within, like, from, I would say, the beginning of May to mid-June.
Mm-hmm.
There's about, and like half of them are planting and half of them are stumping.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of a difference, but like we have, the last couple of years, ever since we joined Ontario One Call in 2014, we've had trees like dying in our nursery. You know what I mean? And when we're paying $300 for a tree that's dying in the nursery, that's where it becomes a problem for us.
And what One Call sees in the system is they see maybe several hundred tickets a week go through, and in that situation, I know there's some other tree companies here as well, and municipalities also are very involved in the tree planting blitzes that take place every spring. You're likely to get a call from Ontario One Call saying, do you really anticipate doing this work within 30 days? And it's important that the person putting those tickets in be very clear about what they plan to do when. It's also good for those people to have a dialogue with the members as well. Even if an excavator plans on planting 1,200 trees in 6 weeks, that's a lot of volume for any locate service provider to take on at any one time, especially if they don't anticipate it. So to whatever extent the City of Sudbury, yourself, can give the heads up to the local members that this is your volume of work and you expect to put it in during these several weeks, that would really help. One complaint we get from our members a lot is that the One Call system gives them things in real time. It's not necessarily a great way to predict the peaks and valleys that come, and a lot of them would like more forward-looking information, which we're not able to provide. So to the extent that you can provide notice to members of big projects in terms of the volume of locates, like tree planting, or major projects which may not be geographically large, but have a large and sustained impact in terms of the number of locates received, that's the best way to go about it. So there's a few more. Corey will be the microphone master.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm a plumbing and drain contractor in the private sector, City of Toronto, GTA. And one of the major issues that we've run into with curbing the abuse for emergency locates, about 95% of our calls that come into you, which can vary from anywhere from 2 to a dozen calls per day for locates, are for residences in the GTA where people have sewage backups in their basement. And customarily, the locate times would be within, 2 to 6 hours, which was wonderful. We're now facing a situation where it's taking up to 5 days to get a locate for a residential home. And to me, that is a loss of essential service. Number one, you can't use the sewage facilities in the house. And number two, oftentimes, but not always, there's actual sewage floating up in the basement. So is this open for discussion? Like, where can we go with this situation? Because 5 days, quite honestly, isn't acceptable for anyone.
Yeah, I'll tell you a bit about the policy that we've put in, and also some of the messages that we've delivered to the membership as well. You won't like all of my answer, but I hope some of the answer will put you in the right direction in terms of how you want to pursue this. And One Call is always happy to follow up on this because we were concerned about some of the exact same things you're talking about. The standard for emergencies under the legislation is really quite high. It talks about life-threatening scenarios and pretty dire circumstances. So in that sense, it excludes a lot of things that normal people might say are emergencies. If you don't have water or sewer, that's a real problem. And we've had a lot of members identifying, at the same time, identifying these types of situations which weren't critical within 2 hours as being outside of the definition of emergency. So that's where that creation is. And to put it into perspective, if you look at the ORCGA DIRT report, they record about 6,000 damages a year, and that's where the gas utility is participating, and that's where most of the damages are. If you round that up to 10,000 to include other entities that aren't involved, and let's say you double that number again to include not damages by a third party, but just system failures and leakages and cracked pipes and things like that, that gets you to about 20,000. We were getting more than 50,000 emergency calls a year for tickets. So we knew there was a real skewing beyond what was really happening out there. And our compliance people did a lot of field investigation to investigate these types of circumstances. And in pretty much all cases, they determined that specific to 2 hours, it wasn't an emergency of that urgency. We moved to that type of work from emergency, which is by law, 2-hour response, to P0, which is essentially 24-hour response. What we communicated to members was around the exact situation you're talking about, which is if you don't have water or sewer, it's a problem. You have to get things cleaned up. And sometimes it's an issue with foundations. And that's a bigger undertaking as well. In 2 hours, you may not necessarily be ready to fix that problem, but you can't have people go several days without water or several days with sewage issues. So we definitely pushed members to adopt the 24-hour standard, and more practically for sewer and plumbing contractors to contact those members to work out a time that's mutually agreeable. So we're trying to create space between a 2-hour locate, which a lot of our members think is excessive and beyond the definition of the law, and your typical 5 business day locate, which is not suitable for someone without water or sewage. So we pushed the members towards that 24-hour standard. I know it's not going to sound right to you, but by and large, the feedback has been pretty good in terms of the timeliness of response. But I do encourage the sewer and plumbing contractors to work with members, and we do press with members the need to respond to these things in an appropriate way, and appropriate not in terms of 5 business days, but appropriate in terms of what a normal person would think is appropriate for not having water and sewage.
Now, by and large, I'm not suggesting every call is taking 5 days, because it's definitely not. We've had, complete locates within 2 to 5 hours, which was the norm for us, the trailing years prior to this year, which is perfectly acceptable. Even within 24 hours, to be honest, if we have to, keep that customer at peace and say, look, tomorrow we're going to be in here, we're going to get this done. But more and more, we are running into the situation where 3 days is very common. Mm-hmm. When I reference 5 days, we've only had 2 or 3 at this point. And, what do I do to my customer? I call your local alderman, call your insurance company. Luckily for us, we're in the restoration business as well. So it's actually,
Yeah.
It's been pretty lucrative for us at this point, but, I'm not losing clientele at this point, but my biggest fear, and I have heard of this, nor have I ratted anybody out or chased anybody on this, but I did in fact lose a client last week after 2 days we could not get the locates, and they allegedly hired somebody else to come and do the dig without locates. Yeah. And that's the bigger issue here.
Yeah.
And the insurance companies, of course, with dispensing higher funds to repair properties with sewage in the basement and tear out some reconstruction.
Yeah. And certainly let us know about excavators who might have a chronic problem, even sort of off the record to our compliance people, because we do want to speak to those people and tell them what expectations are.
I did use the word alleged.
Very careful.
I don't know if this is for you, Ben, or for you, Len. I know that when I sat on the board several thousand years ago, I did bring up in front of the then ministry representatives when they were starting to legalize Ontario One Call about bringing in Indigenous communities into the fold. And at that time, when I sat on the board, I thought it was doublespeak that I got from the ministry, because I do understand this is a provincial organization. I do appreciate that. But also, being general manager of Six Nations Natural Gas, I get a lot of line whacks. And the line whacks are coming from excavators who are off community, and they don't care. And I honestly think something has to be done. I don't know what's being done. I hope I'm not going to get doublespeak like I got 4 years ago, but I mean, Walpole Island is working with Union Gas to put in a natural gas system. Akwesasne is talking about putting in a natural gas system, and I'm sure they've got Bell and Hydro in these communities. It can't be ignored, but it seems to be.
It's a good question, Nick, because of course the First Nations reserves fall under federal jurisdiction. There is, however, federal legislation, Senate Bill S-229. It's passed through the Senate. It was sponsored by, I'm going to forget his name, but Senator Mitchell, Grant Mitchell from Alberta, who's used to be former leader of the Liberal Party in Alberta. And he sponsored legislation with cooperation from the Canadian Common Ground Alliance and other stakeholders. And they got it through the Senate, but now it has to go to the House of Commons. And as an example of the small world phenomenon, the Member of Parliament who is meant to sponsor that legislation is the Member of Parliament for Guelph. So in a small world, it comes back to our home base. They have talked about the specific issue of First Nations communities. There is a specific interest that was identified by senators in terms of how First Nations can and should participate. I'm not an expert in the current legislation. Rob Matthews actually knows more than I do about the current legislation. But I think the view, at least of the senators, which is different than the government's view, was that it would remain voluntary, but they had a lot of interest in terms of instances where First Nations communities have signed up voluntarily, and there are some who have. So that's definitely a live issue at the federal level. I don't know what's going to happen with Bill S-229 this fall when the legislature, the House of Commons returns, but I know I am meeting Lloyd Longfield, who's a local member, in the next couple of weeks, and I'll get a sense from him about how the government may view that question. But generally speaking, the reasons and the positive reasons to join the one-call systems for First Nations communities, the exact same reasons for any other member. And you know, the logic pertains no matter what jurisdiction it may be under.
Hello, I'm a small excavating contractor. Just had some questions about gas line materials. We've had a couple breaks in the past where we're digging, say, 4 or 5 feet away from a service, and we pull on a route and the gas line breaks. So I don't know if there's a standard with what type of material they need to put in the ground, but we're being charged, $3,000 for this because of the repair, the TSSA fees. So I don't know if there's a standard or anything like that.
Was the route located?
Yeah.
So, not really in one-call jurisdiction, but one of the good things is I know some of the Enbridge folks are here. I'm not sure if the Union Gas rep is here. I saw her earlier on today. Oh, there she is. So put your hand up. They'll come talk to you. They'll give you some guidance around issues like that. When it comes to the accuracy of locates, that's not really in one call's jurisdiction. And some people look at that as a deficiency in the law, that your locate can be, 6 meters off in the wrong direction, but as long as something's on the ground and there's some kind of written record provided, that's good enough for us. May not be good enough for Ministry of Labor and TSSA, but the other side to what one call does, you can also look to safe excavation, not in our jurisdiction, but an equally important piece of the puzzle. And that's why ORCGA and groups like that are involved with safe excavation and those types of questions. But I'm sure the Enbridge and Union Gas people will come talk to you about that.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Mike Roof. I'm with Donald Contracting, one of the 3 divisions that do concrete and drain throughout Ontario. We have a Donald Contracting, Donald Concrete and Drain, and Trimana. We do low-rise residential, and what we're faced with, some of our builders are very cooperative. They call the locates for all the trades that participate in new construction, low-rise, avoiding multiple calls for example, excavator, the lead, for pre-sewers, excavator for your basement. So what happens is some builders aren't as cooperative, and they're always insisting that we're responsible for the locates, which we understand, every individual, but that means you're sending the same guy doing the locates or same individual doing the locates for the same site, not just for me, for the excavation of the basements and so on. And if I understand that years ago this has changed where the builder can call locates on behalf of the trades working in his site. We'll do 600 homes in a matter of less than 2 years. We're doing currently that we have multiple sites through Niagara to Bowmanville to Collingwood. Is there anywhere in legislation or like some builders are cooperative and they'll do this where you're avoiding sending repeat locates to the same subdivision? We're talking new development, and avoid sending them for myself, for the excavator, for the builder. And I think some builders are failing to understand that that one locate request can be used amongst all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And is that true? I mean, some builders are failing to understand that? Or
My understanding, and I would not take this to the bank, but if you sort of ask, who's sort of the white hat in terms of dealing with the project, that issue comes up a lot in terms of a contractor and then various subcontractors. Under our law, the thing you have to do is make sure the mark is on the ground and that you have the paperwork and you reconcile the two of them. So you may be the main contractor, have the records, have the marks, but for everyone else who digs after you, they have to do the same process of identifying the marks and identifying the paperwork and reconciling the two. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every individual has to call in if you have, contractors going back to back to back. A similar issue is the TSSA and what they allow in terms of standards, and that might be the change you're referring to. The TSSA has recently changed their standards around having electronic records, which wasn't allowed previously. And my understanding, and if I'm wrong, someone please shake your head violently left to right, but my understanding is as long as it's on a 7-inch diagonal device, so it's not an iPhone, for example, you can utilize the electronic map. So it is possible to share and utilize those things as long as you're under the supervision of the one main contractor. But if you have different contractors coming in at different times for different purposes, it does have to be a separate request. The member, though, can still say, I'm going to send you the records, and if the marks are still there, use the marks. That would be one way to expedite it.
the thing we're faced with is that most of our construction is, we'll dig pre-sewers today, and it's scheduled to do 270 within the next 14 days. And the excavator is directly behind us, so we'll get one day ahead of them, and then following the second day, now you got to dig in basements. So if everybody, I mean, if you have to send a locator for himself, I'm just saying we're trying to save money and be cost efficient here, to send a gas company to do the locates for gas, today not only for me, we're paying them to do it for me, we're paying for, so there's really no savings when that locate can be used for all three of us. Mm-hmm. So, and most builders are very cooperating in that, but some builders are basically putting their gun to our heads and said, no, you call your own, you call your own, you call your own, and we're just wasting tax dollars, we're wasting money, wasting one-call money for something that can be utilized and shared amongst all three of them.
Yeah.
So normally, and most builders will call and say, listen, we're Mattamy Homes or Empire Homes, et cetera, and I'm calling a locate request because 9 times out of 10, within 30 days, they're doing a refresh because their scheduling got changed or moved, or they're not ready, they haven't got their permits. So I'm just trying to figure out a way that builders understand that there is a savings here, that we all can utilize the same paperwork. But again, I mean, I'm not saying if we're digging today and they don't do basements for 30 days, then they should recall it. But we're trying to, a lot of builders are trying to pass it off to everybody else, and it's costing everybody money. So just trying to be efficient,
Yeah.
where we can all share the same and not be held hostage saying, why didn't you call for locates? I mean, we have to, it's a standard 5-day procedure. And normally when I call them in, I say, when do you plan on building? Tomorrow. So I call in the locates, 5 days go by, I got my locates, oh, we didn't get our permits. So I'm trying to avoid all that. So if they don't have their permits, don't ask me, I'd rather they call the locates, put the onus on them, because they're not building one house a month, they're building 270 houses within the next 30 days, 90 days.
Yeah.
That's just one builder. So I'm just trying to, if there's some legislation that could be put on, say yes, they could be shared, get them to understand that, to be more cooperative.
I don't think there's anything that puts that onus on them. They should be interested just in terms of the overall efficiency. But what you're really talking about is something we see a lot of times, which is, you know, a large project and the need for coordination. One Call generally is pretty flexible in terms of how it deals with those scenarios. Some members are interested in doing something called dedicated locator, where you have one locator who's contracted by all the members or approved by all the members to do locate. So it's basically one window shopping for all the locates. But with excavators and home builders, it does become tricky because you need the consent of all the individual parties. And there's no law that really dictates how that can be happened. One Call really leaves it up to excavators and members to negotiate their own arrangements where that type of situation could exist. I should also mention through the Operations Committee, we're working on a related issue, and there's Eric Bohr from Halton Region, our resident expert on unassumed subdivisions, which is the sort of the reverse or the back end of the question, which is you have a completed project, all the services are in, people are living in their house and having a nice time, but who owns the buried water and sewer? It looks like a municipal road, municipal water is going through it, and the municipality is billing for it. But in the view of the municipality, that road is not assumed. It is still the property of the developer or the installer. And our role at One Call is to identify whose job is it going to be to receive requests to locate that, and who's going to be accountable for that. It may not deal with who pays for it. That might have to be worked out between the municipality and the installer/contractor in terms of who they think owns it. But One Call does have the power to determine who is going to be responsible for locating it. And we're trying to make it a very smooth and easy process, but it would still leave the decision about who pays for what to the municipality and the developer, or to the municipality and the developer.
Well, you actually touched on my question that I was about to pose to you. So my name is Sandy. I'm from Royal Oak Tree Services. I'm an excavator. We actually had this issue in the city of Aurora just now. We won a contract for a new subdivision, and this problem with the locates came about because of public water. The developer refuses to work with my company in order to help us prevent having to spend all this extra money on a private locator. I ended up having to hire CLI to come and do the 257 locates that need to be done in the subdivision. I just wanted to know if there's any way to work with the developers and so forth, but since you kind of touched on that, I'm gonna go to my second question. My second question is at the beginning of our planting season, obviously we are mandated by contracts as to when the date has to be completed. Your staff actually reached out to me, individual members reached out to me, and I submitted to them full lists that the municipalities were providing to me of the addresses that we were going to be doing. We're a larger company. We can put 500 trees in the ground in one day because we have the capacity to do so. So I wanted to know if that's probably another procedure that we can add on to, maybe when we submit the tickets, because we also do stumping with the tree planting. Obviously, the stumping requires a machine, but the tree planting doesn't because most of our contracts are for hand digging. Is there any way to make the ticket work so that it's one ticket for both jobs, even though I have a machine and a hand dig going on simultaneously?
Yeah,
I just want to make this work better.
The most important thing is, you know, for the first question about ticket dumping and tree planting, one of the biggest challenges is whether you're on the One Call end or a member's end, you see, you know, several hundred tickets for tree planting and you automatically assume, well, they can't do that much work. So I know Jeff Hitchcock, who does our member training, he's actually worked with a number of municipalities on tree planting on that exact question about literally putting together a list of 1,300 addresses, figuring out how they're going to be broken up in terms of locates and how to sequence them in terms of, because you can suspend tickets for a period in the web system, and then they become active, and you can really essentially stagger your work, and that coordinates it. I'd most of all encourage you to work with the local members in your area, because they won't necessarily believe you're doing it all within 30 days either.
This argument with them before, and when I tried to explain that we have the capacity, the vehicles, it was still a little bit of an issue because we obviously have several contracts. So City of Markham was only 1,800 trees, just one contract. I have 5. So that's my question to you. But
And on your first question too, I don't want to miss that. It's a challenge when you have an unassumed subdivision because essentially it is a private road and it's private property. So it's not under the one call jurisdiction as such.
But see, that was the problem. The developer kept on insisting upon that it's actually a municipality problem and that Aurora should be responsible for it, not him. And then he refused to work with us, and it was it just cost me a whole week of going back and forth.
And it's a futile argument because it's, he said, she said.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, if the municipality says we don't own this, that's probably more decisive than the developer saying, yeah, they do own it.
Yes.
Because ownership is sort of, you need a positive response to accept ownership of something.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I need a mic or not, but. Hi, Derek Whiteman from the City of Guelph. I have 2 questions. First, can you tell me what validates a priority locate? And I'll tell you why, because we get priorities in our city for tree planting, basketball nets, swimming pools. So our guys are being dragged out of more vital locates to go do a priority to plant a tree.
Mm-hmm. So priority locates under the bylaws are a courtesy provided by members. So to get back to the early question about sewer and water repairs, a P0 or a P1 or a P2 or P3, those don't actually have a specific legal status. They're really a courtesy provided by members to excavators. So if you get a P0 request for something inane, like you mentioned a
Swimming pool.
Yeah, so a swimming pool, like you have an emergency swimming pool.
It's got to be pretty hot.
I've never seen the need for an emergency swimming pool, but it's really up to the members. You're not required to do that within 24 hours or 2 business days if it's an inane request. Our recommendation would be is to contact that excavator. If it's sewer and water, it's probably a very sensible request, an appropriate request they're making. If it's 24 hours for an emergency swimming pool, it's probably not. But that discretion rests with the member.
Yeah, and I think the bigger problem is, like, to touch on the gentleman's point from Toronto, sanitary, that is a priority. But when we get a priority for a pool, a tree, a fence, when we get one in for sanitary, which is a priority, at that point you're mad because you've gotten a lot of dumb priorities and you're like, well, that's just another one to worry about.
Yeah.
So it's taking away from actual sanitary backups in a house as opposed to a basketball net in the driveway.
Yeah, and I think on those tickets, you're demonstrating a lot of responsibility because you are treating sewer and water like a priority. And
Totally.
You're a municipality and you think of that person as your ratepayer and your citizen.
Yep.
Not just, some random entity that's inconveniencing you. But on non-priority priorities, I would definitely push back and maybe they made a mistake planning their swimming pool or some circumstance changed and maybe you can help them out, but you should do so in a mutually agreeable time frame. You shouldn't feel burdened because they happen to say, I want a P0 or P1.
No, we still do them if we can, but my point is that it kind of takes away from the actual ones, right? You get mad because you're getting them in for not priorities and then the sewer comes in and then I'm just saying that is taking away from the actual priorities, in my opinion.
That's how we got caught in the emergency locate issue to begin with, right? So emergency locates were being abused to facilitate bad planning. And when you try to tackle that problem, a lot of things come out and the numbers go down, but it still is not down to the level that it should be. And for the members, they start to mistreat some emergencies because they're so used to getting there and there is no real emergency. So it's a real dilemma to make sure you get it right. and that you can create a priority when it's necessary, and everybody understands the rules of the game. Right?
Yep. And my second question is, and you kind of touched on it, digital mapping on site. You said as long as we have a 7-inch tablet or screen. So can we start doing that tomorrow?
That is my understanding. I'm not the TSSA, and their word is the official word. I would usually know the actual number or the actual code reference. I'm not sure if anyone here knows that offhand. I'll ask the audience if they have a specific. You mean Z247? So Z247 is the CSA standard. So the CSA did this long project about damage prevention. It's been adopted by reference by the TSSA, and it sounds like that's where that reference may be. So if you Google Z247 on the TSSA website, you should get some information about that. But don't take me for the authority on that.
I'm from the city of Barrie. I guess I'm coming here both as representing a municipality and an excavator, and I've got 2 questions. Firstly, is there a way to get an estimate as to when a locate will be completed? We have a lot of problems with tickets taking upwards of 2 or 3 weeks of being completed, and we contact a member to ask for a status. We're told it's tomorrow, it's tomorrow, it's tomorrow, and we never really get an accurate date. And we're not necessarily saying, okay, it needs to be done tomorrow, but we do need to know when we can mobilize to that site because there's logistical concerns that come with this.
It's interesting, Gord from Rogers, Gord Campbell's here, and he's a big champion of adding more fields to Feedback 360. So you could track a locate like you would track a package through Canada Post. And it's a lot to ask in terms of the locators providing that frequent updates, because at one call, we just want to know when they got it and when they completed it. We're sort of binary in that sense. And if they're sort of stringing you along with a locate, which does happen, I don't know if that sort of that Canada Post style thing will necessarily get you a better answer, because it'll always be waiting there. We always do encourage people to work with those members if they're getting not only not timely service, but also being strung along. And I always do tell people, you know, it's fine to file a complaint with Ontario One Call because we want to track these things. If you look at our website under compliance, there's the summation of 2016 complaints. And it really shows where the pressure points are in the system. It's mainly late locates and it's mainly GTA, which I think corresponds with everyone's personal experiences. So it is okay to complain, and we do want to hear your complaints because it gives us a sense of where we need to focus a lot of our compliance efforts. I wish there was some way to make it more reliable that you know when it's going to come. Is it really going to come tomorrow? But I think it's unlikely through a one-call mechanism.
That makes a lot of sense, thank you. And my second question is, what constitutes a private locate? We have buried pumps in the sanitary sewer system, and they're fed by hydro from the local electrical utility. And our water operations folks believe that this is a problem with the electrical utility. The electrical utility believes it's a problem with the city. And generally, the only way we've been able to resolve it is bringing in a private locator with the cost borne directly by the excavating party.
A very good question. Steve Was led an initiative on that exact question. There's a lot of differing approaches in terms of private infrastructure in the public right-of-way. We have a lot of instances, I don't know if any came up in Barrie, but North Bay is one example where they are privately owned electricity connections that meet the local utilities infrastructure in the public right-of-way. So it's one thing to get a private locate for private property, that's pretty conventional, but to get a private locate for the public right-of-way is tricky, especially when the nominal owner of that infrastructure won't necessarily know it's there. We had the issue in North Bay, I think it was with a KFC. Another one was with an LCBO. They're probably the tenant there, and they probably, even if they were the owner, don't know there's a private electric connection there or where it is or the circumstances by which it was installed 30 years ago. that is a real gap in the system. And Steve brought together a large number of stakeholders of excavators and utilities, municipalities, and it was very diverse in terms of how they approached it. So Steve and everyone is trying to work towards a common approach towards it.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
That should have been a one emergency response with an LCBO.
You can see, they don't need electricity to, though. I assume if the electricity goes out in the LCBO, it's all free. Only the cash registers don't work.
Hi, I'm a contractor out of the Niagara region, and I've noticed a few times I've called in for locates, Terry Sewer or whatever. It's been not an emergency, but it's a priority, and I'll request, like, I'll call in today and say, listen, tomorrow morning I really need to have this this service located. A lot of times the operator on the phone will say, well, you know what, hang up and call me back tomorrow, and call it in as an emergency. I'm thinking I'm doing them a bit of a service and giving them like a 24-hour window. And then the locator will show up on the job site the next day and he'll say, listen, you know, we're getting these emergency locates and, you know, you got to give us, you know, X number of hours. And I'll explain to them, you know, I'm trying, and I've done, and oh, it's falling apart. How can we rectify that? Like, how can, you know, I'm thinking I'm trying to do my best by giving them that, you know, a minimum of 24-hour notice sort of thing, and they'll say, you know what, just hang up and call back tomorrow with an emergency.
Not the appropriate way, so I'm sure Alex McMahon, our contact center manager, has just made a note of that, because that's not helpful advice for you, and it's not helpful for the members either. So if that came from us, my apologies, because that's not appropriate. We have done a lot of training in the last couple months around moving those to P0s. The agents have received specific training about how to mark in the comment section so that members know that this is an urgent request and it's been deferred from emergency to P0. So agents should be a lot better at signifying when something is a scenario like you're talking about.
Okay.
And, you know, even back, you know, to the old call center, there was this notion that you could somehow game the emergency system. We're trying to get away from that practice and also give our agents the tools to clearly identify when something is an urgent situation, if not a 2-hour emergency.
Standard or a 2-hour emergency, would you consider getting rid of the priority 0, 1 through 4 and maybe creating just a third urgent ticket request for those ones where the sewer isn't backing up into my basement, but by tomorrow afternoon it might, so make it that a 24-hour emergency, so that our locators aren't working on priority 1, 2, 3 for those pools and fences that the customer didn't call in on time, and focus their time on true emergency and/or urgent tickets.
And that is a possibility. The priority system is defined under the bylaws, so we'd have to change the bylaws. And the priorities as defined there are just a carryover from the previous system, pre-legislation. But certainly Steve Waugh and other people say to me, can we have a different type of thing where there's, you know, a mandatory 24-hour designation, so something in between an emergency and a 5-business-day locate. That's something we're certainly open to considering. It would have to change the bylaws, which is a pretty substantial thing. But I think even on our own end, we're open to considering other options than just 2 hours, 5 business days, and everything in between is voluntary and to be agreed between the parties.
Steve from Region of Durham, member. So when we receive these locate requests by email, we don't know if it's an emergency or a priority. Well, with emergency ones, the operator calls us. but the priority zeros, ones, twos, and threes, is there any way of putting in the subject, like the locate request number, put beside it, that it's a priority zero? Because we don't know until we open up. Like we'll get a dozen or so locates come in and you gotta print them all off, open them all up, or have a look at them, and then sometimes it doesn't jump out at you that it's a priority zero or a priority one. But if it was in the subject beside the locate number, that it's a priority zero, then we would know right away that we could sort the locate request by their priority, rather than having to open them all up and read them all to see what they are.
And oftentimes, we always encourage the excavator to call the members, and the excavator might call the member as soon as the ticket's produced, and so they call you and they're like, oh, have you got our request about this? And you're like, what request? Because it's just in your inbox the last few minutes. One thing we've done, and this gets back to the previous question, is agents are now identifying those types of P0 urgent projects with a very specific tagging in the comments box. So they're marking that as urgent in the comments field. So if you're just flipping through tickets that come in, that's where to look to see if something is urgent. Beyond that, I'm not sure if it's if there's an FTP protocol or there's different ways things can be flagged or signaled. Certainly Katie and Alex McMahon would be interested in that.
Hi, I'm coming from City of Markham. We receive a lot of locates requests, like the lady mentioned before, like a tree planting or new subdivision. For us, we try our best to do, but sometimes we appreciate the caller, and if it's a new subdivision, and give instead of 50 tickets on the same street and give us one ticket. The way is it saves us a lot of time to clear on 360 and save a lot of time to send up a work order. One day I received more than 50 locates on the same street, new subdivision, and we have each single one we have to clear in the 360. It's not only the money cost us, because each ticket we have to pay a fee and also increase a lot of workload for us. So in that case, we'll save a lot of time on one part, and then we can have more time to work on other emergency, like a priority one. We got a phone call from the caller say, okay, I just placed a ticket and it's a priority. We need to do the job tomorrow morning. We already have a contract or whatever, and we need to be on site tomorrow morning, which is really tough for us. We try to accommodate that, but sometimes we have lots of emergencies in our area, and we cannot really accommodate you call in today and tomorrow morning we have to send somebody there. That's not really applicable. But if you give us 24 hours, we can do that. We try to accommodate that. We see, okay, and we get this afternoon, we'll see, try to make it tomorrow afternoon to get there and to do. Not like I call you 4 o'clock and tomorrow morning we start work. That's not really easy for us. Another thing is for the people here, mostly is a contractor, maybe for you, for the relocate, sometimes they put a rush. I got quite a few, they push a rush order, and then we did that. And then 30 days later, they renew. If it's a rush job, why you need to renew? I really don't understand how they do that. And we got quite a lot. We rush the job done, and then they renew that, relocate, once and twice. And when I called them and said, okay, you put this originally as a rush. How come you didn't do that? We rushed to get your job done. And then 30 days later, you want us to renew again, and then again. That's really not, I know they don't pay a fee. For them, they don't care. But for us, for other customers, we care. We need to save our time for more emergency or urgent one than the one you don't really need to do and you push us to be emergency or priority. So that's another thing. And the third one is duplicated ticket requests. one day I received 3 exact same address, same company request, and one after another. One is 1 hour later, another one is 2 hours later. Same location from same company. I don't know how that happened, but that's really, we have like 2 or 3 people doing the screen, the locate ticket in our inbox. So if only one person, we can catch that. 3, we don't know. We issue 3 tickets out, and then 3 work orders generated. And 3 guys I have to run to the location to do the locate, and then turn back, and there's 1 person doing send out like a clearance 360, and saw that, said, how come we have 3 work order for the same company, same location, same address, and same kind of job they're doing? So that's really is not really good for everybody. So that's something. And the last one is for 360 clearance. We do, like, the clearance have a very limited choice. One is completed, one is a clearance, one is a call member or not completed to request the further information. I wonder whether it's possible can put more choice, like a private or unassumed or canceled. So when we clear that, we don't need, like we know which one is which one, and when you, I don't know how is that possible or not, so can give a little bit more choice for us to when we clear the 360.
Yeah, I'll try to answer the question, I guess, reverse order. With Feedback 360, and this gets back to an earlier answer, and Gord Campbell from Rogers has great vision of Feedback 360. There's really 2 challenges with adding more fields and more granularity to Feedback 360. The first is just a technological challenge of adding those fields. That's a pretty involved process, and you'd be surprised how long it takes with Teldig, our partner, who's here today, who does our system. The development is pretty substantial. It's more substantial than what should be a pretty straightforward change would seem. The most important part is the second part, which is it's only as good as the information that all members put into the system. And what might be a real incremental benefit to some members may not be viewed as important to another large cohort of members, in which case you get a very mixed set of data that's in the system. And that's one of our concerns, because if we make changes to Feedback 360, we want to make sure that it has broad use for everyone involved. With your question about 50 tickets for 50 trees, that does come up a lot. I think Steve Waugh was dealing with, I think, that exact same number of tickets for that exact same number of trees. Maybe it's your request. If you remember Katie's presentation on the map selection notification, that should simplify a lot of things, because if you had 50 addresses, 50 civil addresses at 50, with 50 trees, 1 each, you might see that as 50 different requests. But with map selection notification, it gives you a much better sense of selecting a geographic area as opposed to a number of civic addresses. The same issue comes up with boreholes, where they're really digging a number of holes in a specific geographic area, yet they're trying to somehow place that in the context of civic addresses, and you end up with a locate area that's much, much larger than any area where they might actually do the excavation. In your comments around locates and your responsiveness to locates, like City of Guelph, it sounds like City of Markham, or the town of Markham, is trying to do the right thing, which is to prioritize things in a reasonable way and provide reasonable and appropriate levels of service. It's difficult sometimes when excavators treat, thankfully this is not many excavators, but there are a cohort of excavators who almost think it's like a pizza, like you can order it and it comes in half an hour, without recognition of what it takes to provide a locate in terms of scheduling work and just the orderly execution of the work. And so I think what sounds like Markham's doing the responsible things like Guelph is. And I also encourage people to think about it from the other perspective as well, which also sounds like you're accommodating. When you have an excavation, whether it's a large, well-planned project with locates called in, well in advance, or if it is the emergency swimming pool. There's always someone at the end of the locate. A locate sounds like an inanimate object, but there's someone who's building that pool, and that's a lot of economic activity, and a family that's going to enjoy that pool, and a family that's without water or who has sewage in their basement. And I always encourage members to take the viewpoint that as much as it looks like a cost unit that's on your budget, and that's a big pressure to maintain and pay for, always remember there's someone at the end of the locate who's probably spending a lot more money and is a lot more involved. I think of the Sewer and Water Main Association. They have members who will spend 20 grand a day on a project easily, and far more in many cases. A $20,000 project, or a family who doesn't have water or sewer, shouldn't be waiting for days for want of a $30 locate or a $50 locate. That would be the tail wagging the dog. So I always encourage members to think about who's on the other end of the locate.
Yeah, thank you. Regarding the 360, it's not only us like a request like more choice. I got a phone call from other cities. They asked me, how do you do when you clear the 360? I didn't do anything. It's not, or it's a private, or it's unassumed, or it's cleared. We don't have any service. How do you clear your 360? Because they didn't give you that choice. So it's not only us. It's other cities that they call me too to see. So that's the one. For the tree planning, like a new subdivision, I appreciate it if you please order like a same street for example, civic number 1 to 30, and this one we know every single house have the tree, so we do one. We send out one order, and we do like a 1 day or 2 day locate every single house. So that's reduce the tickets taken. Thank you.
Hello, this is Nathan from NG Canada, and we operate a number of wind farms and solar farms around Ontario. My comments focus on the 360 feedback, and I'll just share personal experiences from our company and working with us over the last half year. Our experiences, and they may not be everybody's, but ours are that it's a very cumbersome piece of software. It's very time-consuming to work with. It has increased our costs. It has increased our time to use it as a member over the past year. And despite some of the improvements that have been made, granted, it's, from our perspective, has very limited value for ourselves as members. So what I'm wondering is if there is a way to work with in one call or work with the members to improve the 360 feedback system. And so our goal is to provide constructive feedback so that it can be improved for everybody, including ourselves. We haven't felt that there's been a clear forum for providing that feedback to 360 feedback to get those improvements. We've talked to board members, we've talked to one call, we get mixed messages about what can or cannot be done or how it can be improved. Is there a person, a contact that is set up that we should be contacting, or is there in future a committee or a team that can be set up that we can go to as a member to implement or to provide those suggestions? And that would include the MSN that's coming along the pipe as well. We applaud that, but there is definitely some snags we're running into with that as well. So just a question for you there, Ben.
Yeah, it's a good feedback as well. Our operations committee is looking to sort of renew its work and its work plan. One thing that certainly the ministry has put into my ear and I've put into the committee's ear is, there's a cohort of 8 people or so who are on the operations committee, but what do you do about the other 792 members who don't necessarily have regular input unless they go out of their way to reach out to someone? So with them, we've discussed setting up whether it's monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly call where it's almost like a town hall or webinar style format where either the whole committee can hear from the whole membership or you go sector by sector. So if you're in the electricity sector, you can talk directly to the electricity rep. And it's also worth talking about small members as well. So there's a lot of economic activity with wind power, a lot of dollars involved. But in terms of the actual linear infrastructure in the public right of way. It tends to be in rural areas and relatively limited. And if you're a large member, I think it's very fair for Ontario One Call to say, you're going to have a very sophisticated system to receive our requests, FTP protocols, and these things are going to work in a very specific way. But most of our members are on the small side. Of the 800 members we have, 250 don't use up the $500 credit they get at the start of the year. So, and I'm sure some wind farms are part of that as well. So for the smaller members, we also have to be mindful of what burdens are we placing on them. So we've talked about Feedback 360 a few times. If you're a large user and a large excavator as well, more fields in Feedback 360 and being able to track various locates and their delivery seems like a really nice tool to have. For the small members, it seems like a really big burden. So there's that trade-off as well. You know, thinking of some smaller members, we've helped a lot of the smaller members through Feedback 360. In a way, Feedback 360 is the one thing that is definitely incremental because of Bill 8. It is not something you had to do before, and it's something you do for the benefit of the One Call system. To actually, it's an active response system. You have to proactively tell us when you've completed a locate, a self-reporting model. So in a way, it's not really meant to be a help to the membership. It's meant to demonstrate their compliance to us. And to the extent to which it helps you govern your own performance, or if you outsource your locate service providers, that may not be a major benefit. Hopefully we've made the compliance part of Feedback 360 pretty easy. It can be updated on a regular website. It can be done in a pretty manual way. A lot of members have very elaborate link-ups between their LSP system and our system, but it can be done in a pretty simple way. So I would encourage you to keep an eye out for those notices and those opportunities for members to have dialogue with the operations committee, because I think that'll come up pretty soon.
Just go back to my original question, though. Who is the contact, or who do we contact specifically to get feedback through on this site? Is it the board member? Is it Ontario One Call?
I'd certainly encourage you to work with our staff. I think on Feedback 360, best to talk to Katie Gottsman. And we're interested, you can call staff, and this goes for everyone, you can call staff just with your general concerns or general ideas, and we'll certainly tell you, where we are on the subject and what other members think about it. And we're quite happy to have those dialogues because, we don't come across members in our day-to-day business. They don't knock on our door on Cooper Drive in Guelph and tell us their daily problems. But we're certainly open to hearing what you guys are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And if you follow up with Katie, I'm sure she can give you some direction as well. And as for the operations committee, there is a desire they have to be more known amongst the membership, and for people like you to have pretty easy access to them if you have a question or concern. So look forward to that in the next couple months.
Hi, Jeremy Sherman, Niagara Region, member and excavator. I just had a question about planning tickets. Is there any desire from membership or Ontario One Call when you were submitting a planning ticket to make sure that you've notified the person who's requested the planning ticket of all of the individuals that are on that ticket? I know in the Niagara region, Enbridge is not notified on a planning ticket, and you've got to contact them directly. However, there's no literature that I could find anyway that said exactly where to contact them or who is not contacted on that planning ticket, because that makes life difficult when you come to do your install.
It's a good question. I think I know John Huber from Enbridge is here, and you can follow up with him. There is a lot of interest, to talk of the issue generally, there is a lot of interest in the planning process and how we can make it easier. A lot of members identify situations where excavators call in locates primarily for the purpose of just planning their own work with no intention of digging, which is explicitly not legal under the Act. So we want to do things generally as Ontario One Call and through our membership to encourage ease in terms of using planning tickets and that process as a whole. We don't want to make it difficult, and we don't want to make it a good idea or a good practice for excavators to call for a locate site, because that's the best way to find out.
That being said, I'd like the Niagara region to be involved in planning tickets. I know right now we're not, so whoever I can get involved with, so that when a planning ticket in the region does come up, I can give them the appropriate information so they can plan their excavation accordingly.
And there's a different mix. My utility background's mostly in the City of Toronto, and there's a Toronto Public Utility Coordinating Committee and a very formal process for markups, and the municipality does a map of all the planned construction work for the next 3 years, and it's all color-coded. And I think outside of Toronto, it's very much a patchwork of municipalities that have that kind of robust process and those that do not. And I would certainly encourage, and if to whatever support we could provide, we would provide for upper tiers and lower tier governments to work together towards better collaboration and planning amongst themselves.
Hi, I'm Kelly from PVS Locates. I have a question, I suppose, for the members and Ontario One Call. We as an LSP don't always receive tickets where it gives us 5 business days to do the ticket. An excavator will call Ontario One Call, request a locate. Our system does not get it immediately from Ontario One Call because it has to go to all these different lookup centers first. So we don't even get the ticket until the lookup centers look at the ticket and either say, yes, you mark, or no, we clear it. And on occasion, it can happen where we only get 3 days to do that ticket. Sometimes we get priority ones that are late because they're sent to us on the day that they're due. And we're wondering if there's any way that Ontario One Call can work with the members to even pass this message on to people so they know when they call our office or they're looking for a locate, they'll say, well, you've had 5 business days. Well, we don't always. Sometimes we have 3. Sometimes we have 2, depending on the lookup process, because it's 24 hours from Ontario One Call. Takes it, and our lookup centers say we'll have it to you within 24 hours. So that's 2 days right there. If they call a ticket in at 5 o'clock on a Friday, that's the call date. So it's 24 hours from them, and then another 24 hours, and our office staff may not get it till the next day at 7:30 in the morning. So then you're looking at the possibility of 3 days before we even see that ticket. So I'm wondering if there's some way the members can work with Ontario One Call to advise people of this process, because a lot of people don't know and don't understand that this is what we go through.
And it's a bit challenging. I mean, that's a granular thing in the system where certain members, when a ticket is created, like you mentioned, it goes to a clearance center, and that is a useful thing in the sense that maybe that member can provide a clear, which is one less locate that has to be done, one less thing the excavator has to wait for. At the same time, the conundrum you identified is it's not actually released to the locate service provider until all that's done. So now you're dependent on someone else completely different and separate from you to release the ticket for your use. And if it's done in 2 hours, it's done in 2 hours. If it's done in 2 days, it's done in 2 days. And you're sort of a victim of what's done. And that's a real challenge. And in a sense, the winner of that process might be the members, it might be the excavator, but it's certainly not you. And you're sort of the guaranteed loser in that situation. But from the excavator's point of view, they don't really care that it went to a lookup center, and the lookup center is different than the LSP. The law says 5 business days, and that's what they're entitled to.
But if they don't understand, we've only had the ticket for 2, or we may have only had it for 3.
So amongst the members, it's good for them to have dialogue about their clear centers, how much time they allow for it. Our standard is for our suspended web tickets, which is something completely different. 90% are done within 24 hours, and usually around 97% within 24 hours. So it is an example of where members can better dialogue together to make sure that their LSPs aren't disadvantaged. Because at the end of the day, the LSP's performance is the members' performance. So they're not hurting anyone but themselves, essentially. think it's on.
Hello? It is, sorry. Sorry, I'm a sewer and water contractor. I have... Hello? For tickets, projects that go on beyond 30 days that are also multi-scope, such as a road reconstruction that might have sanitary sewer, sanitary laterals, services, vice versa. How do we get those carried over? And the reason I'm asking this is I had an issue with where the scope of work had changed from what was marked on the original ticket beyond the 30 days. And when I went to mark to do the remark, the girls from one call had said, no, that doesn't qualify for a remark because your scope of work has changed. That is now a new ticket.
So there are a lot of requests like that where oftentimes the excavation area has changed or the type of work has changed, and those do require a new ticket. With the lifespan of locates, this is a complaint we get very frequently, which is, you know, I'm doing a project, it's a very involved, time-consuming project, and some locates are good for 30 days, that's typical for gas. Others are 60 days or 90 days or the life of the project. So while I'm doing my work, I don't want my locates to expire, but there's no standard approach. So oftentimes an excavator is behaving responsibly, making sure he has non-expired locates, yet it has to do a patchwork of relocates. And that's a problem that comes up as well. But if the scope of work changes, and especially if it's outside the excavation area, that is a new ticket. And we do get a lot of complaints and damages relating to, I just made a little change or I was just a bit outside the excavation area. And there are a lot of problems come from that.
Okay, so what do we do in a case where we have a project that goes on such as that and has exactly that? You've got, you know, you typically start with your deepest, you start with your sanitary sewer, then your storm sewer, your water main. By the time you move on, what do we do? Do we do a ticket for each scope of work? It's still property line to property line if it's a reconstruction job. So I think there's...
And there can be a lot of variance. Something you might get a clearance, usually you start with the deepest like you mentioned, but the members all have settings in terms of what they give clears for. So you might have a member giving a clear for a certain depth, but they won't clear it for another depth. You may have a member that clears a certain type of work or excavation, but if you're doing a different type of excavation, even if it's not more intrusive or risky or however you look at it, that may not have a clearance attached to it. So it's tricky because, you know, you order something different off the menu and there's a whole bunch of different settings that come with it.
That's almost like altering a dig area, which is a separate conversation. So I guess I'm leading up to my next question is if I'm doing this and I have a project which I think is going to go well beyond the 30 days, and I now have to go and change the scope of work, and I have to do a new ticket versus a remark.
Yep.
Does that mean all my suppressions get redone?
If it's a new ticket, everything gets evaluated. So it sounds like most of your work is typical because you start with the deep depth. So it's not likely you're going to set off different types of suppressions that you wouldn't have previously. But it is that good practice to do it if your scope of work has changed. If it's a remark or relocate, then it's a question of working with the members. And it is possible to coordinate some of the lifespan of those locates. But if things change, you still have to work with the members and you still have to put that request in.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Sorry, I just got one on the new system coming out. I guess with the new system, and I know we've run into it for a couple different reasons. Just going back to my colleague's thing here, if we're doing a full road reconstruction, I know they've kind of compressed things down block by block. You can't do the whole project, which is fine. But in those areas with the new mapping system coming out, there was talk about, okay, here's our locate that we're requesting, and then you guys are doing a buffer around that locate, or what we request. Are we covered to that buffer zone? So if we go outside of our dig area that we mapped, but you guys gave us that, let's say 20-meter buffer zone, whatever it is, are we covered to that point legally?
That's a great question to ask when they do the training for it. Training is ongoing. Jeff Hitchcock is sort of the coordinator of most of our training. And there'll be a lot of training offered both this year and into next year as we transition over to MSN. Generally speaking, what's being asked of the excavator is to identify your excavation area. Ontario One Call puts a buffer just because of different layers of mapping that are on top of each other may not line up perfectly. So we have a buffer that we add as well because of our mapping. And then the members themselves will add their own buffer depending on their risk tolerance with their infrastructure. So if you had a 36-inch extra high-pressure gas main, you're going to have a larger buffer than you might have for a single telecom connection. But what's going to be asked of the excavator is just to identify your excavation area. And the buffers will be set by One Call and the member, and those will be taken care of essentially behind the scenes.
Sorry, I'm just going to back up to what I was speaking about again and what just somewhat Jay just asked. On the web portal, when we do our request, we have, for the scope of work, we have the one drop-down menu, and I know you guys have done everything you possibly can to try and cover every scope of work possible. Is there an option for maybe a second and third so that we can do what's like the main scope of work would say be road reconstruction with then, category A, and then category B would be also sewer, water, something else, so that at least we can kind of get that on that ticket rather than just trying to do the best we can to pick one that sometimes doesn't.
Yeah, and most of the complaints we get about that is the list is so long. There is the comments field, which is now mandatory. So you can put more information around that. That would help the member, the locator, identify stuff. I remember listening to one call, an emergency call that came in where there was a lengthy, futile discussion between the agent and the individual calling it in because they misunderstood each other when one was talking about bar holing and the other was talking about boreholing. So sometimes having a lot of different names and a lot of different options creates more confusion sometimes. So let's make this the last question. We're coming up to 11:30, which is the end of the session here.
The bulletin that went out in May for the renegotiated tickets, we feel there was a big miss there on trying to explain to the excavators on how it can be used to their benefit. Are the bulletins reviewed prior to them being submitted? Like, does it go by the ops committee for wording? I think there could have been a bit of education added in there for the excavators on the renegotiated date. We're hearing from some excavators when they got that bulletin, to them it meant I do not have to renegotiate, or I shouldn't be renegotiating the tickets, as opposed to it being a collaborative effort between the excavator and locators.
I think we're going to see a fair amount more of communication between members and excavators and from Ontario One Call on renegotiations. The specific issue we were dealing with the renegotiations was something very clear, which was members calling up excavators or their LSPs calling up excavators and saying, I'm not going to get this done by X date. It's going to have to be the week after. And the excavator says, what can the excavator say? No. And then the ticket gets renegotiated, even though that discussion doesn't constitute any kind of agreement on the part of the excavator. They've basically just been told that they're not getting what they're legally entitled to. And excavators were, felt very victimized by that. And from what we've heard so far, and Steve Waugh was someone really leading this charge, the feedback in terms of how it's affected renegotiation has been very positive. And certainly there is a communication to excavators that, work with the member work with your LSPs and find mutually agreeable dates. But a lot of excavators too felt, almost powerless to refuse these things, and they felt very victimized by it. And like we've said before, the construction project, whether it's a small project for a couple $100 a day or a giant project that might be $20,000 a day, that shouldn't be, left on hold because of a lack of an individual locate. So there's a part of that too. We don't want a renegotiation process that's managing the load when the law says it's supposed to be the other way around. As we wrap up, I want to thank everyone for their questions. When Scott came up, he was interested, are we going to get, a handful of law ball questions to be done in 15 minutes? I said, I doubt it. And all your questions are really good and really, really pointed. We certainly take a lot of notes from these conversations, and I ask you definitely follow up with myself or the One Call folks. We are interested in hearing what you guys have to say. We rely a lot on your feedback, so never be shy in terms of letting us know what you feel or how you think things are working or not working, because we are all ears. Anything from Scott and Len?
No, I'm fine.
So thanks very much. If you have any unanswered questions or want to follow up, you can talk to me. You can talk to Katie and the One Call team. They're in the back, most of them hopefully adorned with the One Call polo shirts. And thank you so much for your time. We hope you found it a valuable use.